So we've already looked a little bit at fall-offs and how useful they are in the Mesh universe. I wanted to delve in a little bit further and show how they could be used for things like animating a robot's face, for example. So I've got a couple of bits here in the scene. I've got my robot face. I've got a couple of NURBS curves which I've got some animation on, so they're just some shape keys to just be able to add some emotion to our robot. So these are going to be the drivers for the fall-off objects, and we'll see how these all come together now. I've also got a little cube in my scene called Pixel. So what I'd like to do is basically create a screen effect on the robot. So I'm going to use the Mesh network to distribute these using the grid settings. So we're just going to populate that face with all these pixels. So from here, what I'd like to do is actually use these NURBS curves as a driver for the facial animation of our robot. So to do this, I'm going to use the color node, and I'm going to apply those curves as a fall-off object. So to do this, you would first create a couple of basic fall-off objects. I'm going to add a background color of black and a foreground color of blue. So it'll be the fall-off objects that are driving where that blue color sits on our pixels. So we create a couple of empty fall-off objects, and then this is where we can drag and drop our NURBS curves as a connected object. So it uses the shape of those NURBS curves to drive where the fall-off object sits. So by default we would get a spherical implicit object which can be animated and transformed, but we're going to drag and drop these NURBS curves over to our in shape of the fall-off object. So you can see it's already having a bit of influence there. We're actually going to reduce the custom shape radius, so this is essentially the fall-off from the curve, which is why it was so much bigger than our curve to begin with, and we're going to apply two fall-off objects, so one for each curve to drive the effect of that color. So you'll see here if I select the NURBS curves and move them a bit closer to the robot's face, you'll see that they will have an influence on which pixels are essentially lit up, or cubes in this case. So now if we go back to our shape editor, we can start to see that as we animate the shape keys of those NURBS curves, they're having an effect now on the fall-off. So we get a sort of quite a cute little robot animation. So what's nice, again, because Mesh is procedural and it's all live linked, you can actually go in and simply scale down the size of that cube or pixel, and we can create essentially a higher resolution look for our robot face. So we scale these down. We're just going to obviously bump up the quantity so that it looks more like a little screen, and then if we go back to our shape editor now, we can see the animated effect of those eyes. So we can hide those curves, and then you can see the effect that they're having. Now what's nice is we're still able to transform them, so in theory you could rig these curves up if you wanted to have a really direct kind of sculpting feel to creating those character poses on the eyes. And we can also go and have a bit of fun, so if we wanted to also exaggerate the effect, we can add an offset on the scale, for example. So if we look at this from the side now, you'll see that as well as lighting up those colors, we can reuse those fall-off objects to drive our scale effect. So those pixels will essentially look like they're kind of jumping out from the screen a little bit. So you can see as we animate the eye expressions, it's not only changing the color, it's also changing the scale. So once you've set up these fall-off objects, you can reuse them in as many different Mesh nodes as you wish. So there's a few other effects that we can do if we want to go back to the color node, for example, in our Mesh network. We can use that random hue again, so it keeps the overall blue shade that we're looking at. We can change the background color if we want to. And we can also change the random hue of this, so if you want to make it look a little bit more static effect on those eyes, you can do this very easily as well to create quite a nice little robot feel. Now one of the strengths of Mesh is because we are generating a proxy mesh here, so this isn't just instances, this generates a single mesh. we can actually deform this, so whether this is with a rig, or in this case I'm going to use a bend deformer just to show the effect very quickly and easily. So we're applying this to our box, and we're also applying it to our grid mesh network. So you can see you can add some fun, and it's keeping all those pixels live. You can still animate the effect even though we've started bending it. So we can have those eyes moving around. So it just shows how quickly you can generate some quite complex effects using the power of fall-off objects in Mesh. So not only is it a motion graphics tool, it's fantastic for character work like this.